Thank you for joining us. This is Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
And you're listening to the Diesel Performance Podcast. Chris, we've had a really good week over here at Duramax Tuner Calibrated Power.
Yeah, it's been stressful. We have the new website live. Everyone go check it out. It is honestly badass.
Yeah, so we talked about this last week. We merged two websites. We previously had been Calibrated Power and Duramax Tuner. Now, either one of those places will just go to the same website, which will have a DuramaxTuner.com URL.
Yeah. So, been working through some bugs. Paul, I know you've been on the back end of that pretty aggressively. The sales guys, the customer support guys, they're 6-7 guys just bombarding you and bitching at you about what's wrong. So while we're on air, I'll say first and foremost, thank you and I'm sorry. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, listen, I have no website design experience or website administration experience or website experience. So like my interaction with websites until last year has always just been a customer. So it's been fun. If you don't
you have
know
the interactive
something,
experience.
Right. If you don't know something, you should dive in to a really big project when it's already totally late and behind and completely fucked up, and then try to fix it. That's how you learn, folks.
Yeah.
And
feed first, baby. And
speaking of learning, I learned something new the other day. I was talking with Randy Harkema over at Exergy Performance, sponsor of the show, and we were talking about 10 mil CP4 pumps, and in my head, I just meant for a Duramax, for an LML.
Right.
He had to stop me halfway through the conversation and kind of point out, hey, we are talking Duramax, right? I'm like, yeah, of course. He's like, oh, because our Ford 6.7 10 mil CP4 is one of our most popular products.
Ford has a 10 millimeter. Well, Exergy has a Ford 10 millimeter CP4.
Yeah.
So the 2011 to 2019. I don't know what the 2020s are just yet. We haven't dived into them. But 2011 to 2019 has a CP4 pump as well. There are some things in the market, just failures and whatnot. They're not as prominent as an LML, but nonetheless, it is a CP4. They have an upgrade option that has the upgraded metering valve. The pump itself, provides more fuel volume to the Ford guys that are, looking to make more than 600 horse.
Yeah.
So it's a badass pump. Pricing is a little different on those, but nonetheless, I was a little surprised by that too. I know they had upgraded units. I didn't know they had a 10 millimeter. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I knew they had something. We don't deal a ton in that world, so I wasn't totally up to date on it. So I thought that was a pretty cool update for anybody who didn't know. Now you do.
Now you do.
Speaking of not knowing, and now you do, I got an interesting comment on Facebook the other day. Now, our From Facebook segment is sponsored from WC Fab, Jason Worley, Ryan Worley, the rest of the Worley clan, and the whole crew over there do a phenomenal job on fab work, custom paint, powder coating, all sorts of cool stuff. And usually I will pull this segment from either the Diesel Performance Podcast page or our fans of the podcast Facebook group. This one came off the Duramax Tuner page. And I'll do this every once in a while when I find something that I feel like is a common misconception, and we run into it pretty often. Now, Chris, you want to go ahead and read what Justin Trost had to say?
So I want to put this on my LB7. I turned the engine to about 4,500 RPM when I beat on it. Think it will hold up?
Now, this was a comment in reference to a turbo post. So I had posted a picture of one of our 67 G2 stealth turbos. I believe the post exactly was a VVT, so blah, blah, blah. So there's always a few comments that go back and forth with this, but I think here...
Mike Sellers took it for the team and was like, Justin, I have the original bumper I would sell. So dude's trying to hustle.
Your timing is weird on how this is displayed because this is actually after... This is in response to my comment, 13 hours, 2 days.
But still, like that dude...
He is. He's on it. So I reply back to him. I think that bumper is raising your temps, and a dyno would show you make less power at 4,500 RPM than, say, at 3,200 RPM. Mm-hmm. The turbo is designed to hold up to reasonable use. I'm reluctant to promise anything on an LB7 can hold up when being romped on at 4,500 RPMs. So the picture, he does post a picture of his truck. He's got a
beautiful truck.
Yeah, beautiful truck, big nasty bumper on it. So that's what the comments about the bumper are about. But yeah, 4,500 RPM. I pulled this when I heard you today on the phone with a customer talking about horsepower and RPM.
Yeah, and talking that was a little different of a
little bit different of a take on that, but I think we do run into this general concept of horsepower and RPM and what's the relationship.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Justin, just a couple things here. Good point to bring up.
Yeah.
We have to think about the efficiency curve or the power band that the engine operates under. A Duramax stock cam, stock turbo, or most stock frame turbos. And when you get into like the bigger like S300, S400s, those RPM numbers do change slightly.
Sure.
But a 6.6 Duramax is going to make peak torque around like 1900 RPM.
Yep.
Peak horsepower is right around 3,100. So what ends up happening is when you run the engine to that high of an RPM of 4,500, if you look at a dyno graph, for an example, right, peak torque at 1900, then the torque starts to come down and horsepower starts to come up and they cross over.
Right.
And then peak horsepower will come at around 3,000, 3,100. And then you see them both start tapering off, or the horsepower starts really tapering off as torque
horsepower will drop,
Yep.
and torque, especially out at 4,500, is way low.
Now, what you're running into and why that is you have to think of the engine as an air pump, okay?
Yep.
Air in, air out. Well, when we hear the reference of drive pressures, right, that's air in, air out, and you want to be as close to one-to-one as possible. That's what's going to make that engine as efficient as possible. Well, the engine isn't designed to operate at 4,500 RPM, so air is entering the motor and not able to exit the motor as efficiently as it's coming in.
Right.
That's where that bottleneck comes in. That's where you see that horsepower drop off. So to run the engine at 4,500 RPM, you have drive pressures through the roof, temperatures are through the roof. It's just very inefficient because it's hot air and it's creating a lot of friction.
Absolutely.
So.
So we do. We run into this usually around the beginning to middle of sled pull season. This is when guys usually are asking us to remove RPM limiters on their trucks, or they want their. I love like getting the request like, hey, can you get my turbo to light at 4,200 RPM so that when the sled hits, it'll drag me back into my power curve. Yep. Some really different strategies out there. Whether or not they work, I think is pretty anecdotal. Systematically, you will always get the best results while making the most horsepower possible. So the more time you can spend making that right number, the better off you're going to be in the long run. I think that's true when you're romping on it. Now, if you are the guy who's out there romping on your truck at 4,500 RPM, that's fine. Right. Reliability is clearly not your highest concern.
Now, not only from the factual data of the power, right, and how that comes into play, when you're running a stock engine, and I'm just going to assume that Justin's engine is stock, you're going to run into other issues. Running factory push rods, factory valve springs, you could potentially float a valve.
Sure.
A valve could kiss a piston. So there's a lot of other variables to where the factory motor is not capable of supporting that.
Yeah.
Another thing, because you had mentioned you overheard a conversation I had earlier with a customer, the difference between a diesel engine and a gas engine. Gas engines are designed differently than a diesel engine. So, gas engines that are turboed or supercharged or even naturally aspirated, and they're able to run out to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 RPM, awesome. The motor's designed to do that, guys.
Yeah, and that will follow more of your curve or RPM and horsepower.
Correct.
The higher we can get the RPM up, the more power we're going to make with it. Yeah, like you said, diesels are designed for low RPM torque.
Yep.
So everything kind of works around that first concept of low RPM
and that
torque.
has to do with cam pro, it's everything. The bore, the stroke, the cam, it's all of it together. So
the weight of a piston and rod assembly compared to the weight of anything in a gasser. I mean, I think that says the world about how strong everything else around it has to be just to run at slightly higher RPMs. Yep. We're not even talking about crazy stuff. All right, man. Well, I think now it's the time to dive in, guys. You already saw the name in the title. We're excited to have him on. We hope to be seeing him here in June. Chris Patterson from Summit Diesel. Chris, how the hell are you?
I'm pretty good, guys. How are y'all?
I'm still breathing, so I'm doing all right.
There you go. Yeah, man. It's a good day. It's Friday.
Yeah.
It can't all be bad.
That's true.
That's right.
Chris, we are excited to have you on the show for a couple of reasons. One, I know I got to meet you in person out at DPC last year, and I know that we've talked quite a few times throughout the year kind of about going back to the challenge and getting in. We just had KJ on in a recent episode talking, giving us that reassurance. Diesel Power Challenge 2020 is happening. It's going down. We're not exactly sure how the voting is going to happen. But we wanted to bring you on and kind of talk about being the alternate last year and your goals about getting back in as a competitor for this year.
So being an alternate, I feel, was quite the advantage for this year. I got to kind of go behind the scenes and see what it would really take to be competitive and how the truck reacted to the altitude that everybody seems to be really concerned about. And I didn't have a whole lot on the line because after Monday morning, everybody made the cutoff, and I could kind of chill but also be very observant of the activities and how the trucks reacted, and kind of some different strategies that I could go over and improve on some mistakes I saw, and some moves that were really important that paid off well in the end. So I feel like going in, hopefully going to be in the voting list this year going into it. I'm very, very hopeful that we make it, and I feel that I have what it takes to win.
That's interesting, because I wanted to give a couple of quick rundowns on the history of your truck and kind of some of the timeline between June 7th, the last day of Diesel Power Challenge last year, and now. So I spent a whole lot of time this afternoon and did a lot of Facebook creeping on you, Chris, which is rather weird to be talking to you now. So with that being said, one of the first things I did was I jumped on trucktrend.com, checked out Diesel Power Magazine's post for last year's voting. Now, Chris, you and I went through this magazine in real time and actually talked about all of the competitors that were up for voting within each category. So I want to give a quick rundown of your entry last year, Chris Patterson. And basically, we knew who you were. We knew you were from Texas. You had an 07 3500.
Dually, nonetheless.
Dually, absolutely. You told people it would do 1,200 horsepower, 1,800 foot-pounds of torque, and get 12 miles to the gallon. I believe I simply refer to your truck as another S464, S488 twin-turbo Cummins, which is accurate, by the way. That is what your truck was. And that's backed up, or was backed up by F1 diesel 200% over-injectors, 260 fast, and dual industrial injection pumps, tuned by our buddy Gordon.
Love Gordon.
Yeah, absolutely. No injectables, and then custom air-to-air intercooler, hood stack, 48 RE trans built at your shop over there at Summit Diesel, and then some shocks and some tires and things like that. So as I started to do this deep dive, first of all, is that an accurate description of your truck going into 2019 DPC?
Yeah, it was just another Cummins. So yeah, that's pretty accurate.
It's funny you say just another Cummins. I believe that's a quote we had in a previous episode from you, where Chris accused me of skimming over his truck.
Oh,
if you could believe that, Emke, is that Chris Patterson accused me of just skimming over it and calling it just another Cummins. Let's play that. Let's play your accusation. Now, this is one you brought to my attention this morning. I might have skimmed over a little bit when we were doing the initial overview of all of the field of people we could vote on. So walk me through it, man. Like you said, 06 Cummins, dually. How big of fuel? How big of air?
Oh, it's just another Cummins. Just another Cummins.
All right, so you hear that. You hear where he clearly is upset. But let's go back and listen. Let's go back and listen to the first time we mentioned Chris Patterson on Diesel Performance Podcast.
All right, let's hear it.
Looks like we got another S464, S488 compound kit on a 5906 Cummins.
Yep. That's
Chris Patterson's truck. All right, so now that we're back from that, Chris, you can clearly hear what I actually said was we have another S464, S484 twin-turbo Cummins, and then I moved on. We had talked about 5-6 Cummins in a row at that point. 3 of you guys had the same twin-turbo kit. I didn't mean to snub you, but after meeting you, I'm glad I did.
Yeah, me too. You're a hater, so it's cool. I know how to approach it.
Hey, man, to this day, I still am not thankful that I met Paul. So we have that. I got a question for you, though, Chris. Going into this as an enthusiast, I can only imagine you're an enthusiast over the years. You built a really badass, very well-respected truck. Why a dually?
It's one of those things where it just evolved over time.
Okay.
I bought the truck as a wholesale truck at a dealership for really cheap, and it needed a trans. So I put a trans in it, and then it needed a front end. I put a heavy front end on it, and I was like, well, let's throw some tunes on it. Well, then we needed a lift pump, and then I needed a more turbocharger, and it unraveled somehow into this huge monster that it is now, and kind of gotten known for it. And it was the underdog at the drag strip, and people loved it, so I just kept going, and I guess I'm just foolish enough not to know when to stop.
I mean, looking at, like the turbo setup of last year, and we'll kind of get into, if you're willing to share, like what's changed. I mean, to me, that seems like a really quick, I've had the luxury of driving compounded turbo systems similar, maybe not at altitude or higher altitude, but,
Sure.
They have to, they're responsive. So, going into what the truck had this year or last year going into this year, like what are some of those changes as you kind of talked about, the advantage of being able to sit on the sidelines and seeing what guys were or weren't doing?
The advantages were I could see everybody's strategy, and you could see how that played out in competition.
Okay.
For example, in the drag race section, the quarter-mile drag race section, some of the guys were pushing a little harder than what they probably should have, and they hurt parts, and it ultimately took them out of, let's say, the cone course that was immediately afterwards, and that hurt their overall results. I don't think you would necessarily need to be number one qualifier, but at the same time, you don't need to go out there on level one.
Right.
So if you, in my opinion, if you went down the middle of the road for the drag race portion for qualifying, then you could get past first round with a truck that, is in the middle of the pack, and then you could go on to turn up the power. But if you laid it all on the line just to qualify high, you're laying it all on the line for the overall results.
That's a smart approach, definitely. Now, as far as what the truck setup was last year, was there anything that you saw from any of the competitors where you're like, you know what, I think I need to change this, maybe a different, turbo setup or fuel system or anything along those lines, or were you fairly confident in what you brought last year versus, going in this year if voted in?
So I learned a lot on that aspect. I got to see the environment, or the altitude, really.
Yep.
And it didn't have as drastic of an effect as what everybody on the internet and on the forums portrays that it does. I learned from seeing everyone else's setups that I needed a whole lot more turbine. I was very small on my turbine sizes and my AR housings on the turbine side of things.
Okay.
And I needed a whole lot more nitrous. I did not bring nowhere near enough nitrous. So I took all those and we kind of evolved throughout the year of 19, testing and trying things and just seeing and cataloging results and measuring drive pressure versus boost pressure and how timing and pulse width affects that and where the optimum spot is to be.
Okay.
And actually I want to talk about that kind of year of progression, because one of the things that I noticed, Chris, was going through your Facebook feed over the last year. I'd say conservatively 60% of it is about Diesel Power Challenge. So we can see that you have that passion, that you're really ready to go. And as I went through it, I noticed that the truck has gone through some pretty radical changes. Now, one thing I do just want to back up and say is I did an episode with Chris Patterson in his truck at Diesel Power Challenge. So we were outside in the parking lot of ATS, and we actually sat down and did an episode together. What's on the list, what's on the spec sheet of voting wildly undersold the truck.
Okay.
So it does have some really cool features and some really custom things to it. It's a badass truck. I strongly encourage you guys, search Chris Patterson under our podcast feed. Go back and find that episode because it's a great episode. It's about 7 minutes long. So I found a post of Chris taking off, leaving DPC on June 7th. And then the very next thing I see posted is July 18th, T-minus 16 days till Texas Truck Dram.
There's no motor in the truck.
Truck has no engine, no trans in it. It is a roller. That's a pretty short time considering you had to drive home to Texas, Chris. What the hell happened?
We race as much as we can, and there was an event the week after DPC, and I dropped a few valve seats on the way home. We can just leave it at that. So we had to yank the motor out, that night and get it to the machine shop, get a head with some big seats in it, fix the pistons that got banged up, found some mistakes we made and were able to capitalize on the opportunity to improve. And then, I do all my own engine builds and trans builds and turbo fab and all that stuff. So since it was out, it only made sense to open up the trans and check out a few things. I've been having some tough luck on the transmissions, making them live with the amount of weight I am. I'm 7,810 pounds.
Right, I can only imagine.
And the amount of torque it makes, it's just really hard on parts.
Yeah, I mean,
and then I believe that turbochargers are meant to be changed for a reason. And so we just always kind of throw a new set or new sizes or new housings or whatever, on it to try to just change up the game a little bit.
Okay.
Absolutely. I did notice a ton of racing, like a ton of racing. If it's not DPC, this guy's posting about drag racing. What's your favorite track to go race at?
My local and favorite track is Texas Motorplex. It's about an hour from where I live, and it's in Ennis, Texas. It's a quarter mile. It's a great, big, first-class facility.
Isn't that where they did
They always have really good track prep. The last event we went to, there was 27 axles broken. It was a streetcar takeover in Texas.
Oh, my.
And they broke 27 axles. Yeah, it was a long, long day.
Our producer, Justin, he was there a few years ago. I don't know if it was like for the
I think it was back when
NHRDA.
NHRDA was still rocking. I think they did their world finals there one time.
It was pretty cool. It is a beautiful place, Chris. You're right. That's probably the best track I've ever been to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's top notch and it's huge. There's plenty of room for parking for everybody. Texas is like that. When we do it really freaking big and we do it right.
I hear that from everyone that lives in Texas.
You just don't have a lot of trees. I don't get that.
What do you need trees for? Like, what do trees do?
Justin, turn your mic off. Okay, so you clearly spent the summer drag racing. That's 100% what we saw. Do you do any sled pulling?
Yeah, we sacrificed a motor to pull in this year. We put a motor in to go to Texas Truck Jam, and we had some prototype parts in it that we were trying to see what they were doing, some in development stuff. And then a week after we went to Truck Jam, I started the motor the day of Truck Jam, like physically started the engine. Went to Truck Jam, did good, won the dyno contest, brought home $750. Came back a week later, went and sled pulled, and had an injector hang open and completely melted number 6 piston.
No.
And ruined the block, ruined the rod, melted the wrist pin to the piston. It was ugly. Turbine wheels were full of molten aluminum.
Oh, God. One of the...
Yeah, that one took us down for a while. That one we were down for like 2 months on. And then we rebuilt. And at this point, we went from a sleeve down 6.7 motor, which was a 6.2, to a 6.7, a true 6.7 engine. That's when we went to Streetcar Takeover, and we ran 1071 at 137.
Jesus Christ, and a dually.
We left on 8 pounds of boost. My 60 foot was like somewhere in the 1.9 range. So we left super soft. But obviously, the mile an hour, we were making power out the back door.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no shit.
One of the things that you just touched on, too, that I think is really important with any of these competitions, DPC being one of them, is the driver. We talk about, there's a lot of things that you have to have in order to be a true competitor and do well at DPC. But at the end of the day, you have to know how to drive the truck and have the experience in a lot of different scenarios. So, you have sled pull knowledge. You have drag race knowledge. The truck's been on the dyno. I can imagine you being in Texas, you're no stranger to towing trailers and whatnot, right?
That is an accurate statement, yes.
So, it's just one of those things where you have all these tools and all these tools at your fingertips. You have all these weapons that you can use to be really a force to be reckoned with going into the 2020 DPC.
Well, I know, Chris, you've been looking at the voting since like September. I know I found some posts on your page there talking about it's here and then getting ready to fill out the form. Have they let anybody know if you're in for voting yet? I haven't seen that announced.
No, sir. No, it is completely a surprise.
Well, one of the things I noticed as a common thread throughout all of your posts about entering the competition was guys like Richard Coker, last year's winner,
Yeah.
hitting like or commenting on your thread. So it seems like being there as an alternate, you also got a chance to kind of know all the guys that were there last year. Obviously, Richard will be the one guy that's coming back for this year. Do you think you have a bit of a competitive advantage over Richard, considering you've already seen him compete and he hasn't really got to watch to see what you can do out on the track?
Absolutely.
Very good.
Now the truck, I caught a post around October, late October, of you christening an engine, which love that gif. But run us through it. So the engine wasn't actually back together, or when did it go down? When did it get put back together?
I don't know. We've had 4 engines in it throughout 2019, so that's kind of hard to answer that question. But that's the reason that this engine is still alive today, is that we christened it.
There you go.
I never had christened of the other ones in this truck. Growing up, my whole family drag races, and we always, broke a beer on a motor, and they've lived, and it's been great. Well, I forgot that somewhere along the way for these past few engines. Well, I remembered this time.
I like that philosophy.
It's good advice.
That's amazing.
It's just solid backed up advice. I like that. Now, I know you're still playing with the setup on the truck, or still playing with the thing on the truck, because I caught a couple of screen grabs of some dyno graphs. Chris, this looks like our dyno files of running through an R&D truck when we're like on a new tuning platform. Yeah. There's like 30 files here run on just one truck.
Yeah.
Man, that's just a lot of time. How many hours do you think you have into dialing in the setup?
Man, I can't even fathom a lot. I know I have over 27 tune revisions from Gordon on my truck. Now, we have a tune for like a single turbo. We have tunes for compounds. We have tunes for other things that Gordon's always been there to make whatever change I need. And so I owe the way it drives to him. And then Don Morrison of F1 Diesel has a whole lot of input on all the fuel and air stuff. So I owe a lot to my guys that help me out. But we have a ton of time on the dyno, a ton of time doing data logs, working on the drivability. And I drive this thing every day. When it runs and you can go wide open, I go wide open every day. I make at least 1,000, 1,100 horsepower every day.
So you're just doing test hits on the road left and right.
Chris, before we let you go today, give our listeners a rundown of your truck setup. I want to hear everything you got in there right now.
Okay, right now it's a 2007 3500 dually 4-wheel drive automatic. It is still a full weight street driven truck, full interior, weighs 7,810 pounds. I've got a full manual valve body in it from Flat Out Diesel. I build the trans and the motors here. But it's got the Sancher shaft, solid input, Horizon intermediate, fat output, a DPC quad disc converter, 6/7 sleeved motor. One of the heads we kind of put a bank side draft on here. We forked the head out. It's got 200% F1 injectors in it, twin 12 mil BD pumps, 2 fast 290 lift pumps. Currently, right now, today, there's just a single 480, 96, 132 on it. We're trying some singles. Probably by next weekend, it'll have a 475, 96, 115, and a 98, 113, 124 on the atmosphere.
Oh.
And then we have a pair of triples that we're playing with that's pretty good, too. So we have several options on what we can bring to the table. And we might get up there a week early and do some playing around and seeing what really works at that altitude and just go from there. We've got 2 nitrous outlet bottles with the Dash 6 valves in them. We've got 4 big solenoids. So we've got enough to party.
To say the least. And you're saying it's so chill. Like, yeah, we have this. Yeah, we have a
no
little
big
of
deal.
that.
Yeah,
we're going to go a week early and sit in a parking lot and change out triples for compounds to see which one runs
I got
better.
Pepsi and Sprite in my fridge, too. No big deal. Right.
A lot of guys are entering this challenge, and some of them are claiming some really ridiculous numbers. And it's not just about how much horsepower you make or about how fast you run down the quarter mile. You have to have a real truck that's very flexible and can conform to these different requirements. And I'm just a firm believer that a street truck is going to win this thing, and that's what I have.
I think,
and you have to really know how to drive your truck.
I think a couple things here, Chris. Number one, we talked to competitors in the past, and they don't want to say any secrets. And you, I can just tell by talking to you, you're confident in what you saw last year and sticking to your beliefs about this year. And you're going to get a lot of listeners, right, that are going to listen to this, and they're going to shrug it off like like you're saying. They're going to, if this is a horsepower game, maybe they like past guys, they don't sled pull or they've never dynoed and they just drag race, or they're just street trucks, maybe they street race, depending on where you're located in the country, which is a big thing. They're not very well-rounded, and they don't see the importance or the value of being well-rounded. And just talking to you today, you seem very grounded, very level-headed with, what that end goal is and what you're looking to accomplish. So, it seems like you have a really good strategy, going into 2020.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris.
Well, thank you.
I would say all joking aside, because I know I like to tease both of you Chris's, but
must be a Chris thing.
but it is. I think I can confidently say we should, as fans of the show, we should be voting to get Chris Patterson's truck into DPC 2020. We should. I think everybody's going to be excited to see this truck compete. I think everybody's going to be excited to see Chris Patterson actually go out there and be in the challenge and be a real competitor, be somebody who potentially could be in this for a little while.
I mean, a driving skill set there, but more importantly, a crew long dually hurting some feelings. Like,
Dude,
come on, man.
For real. All right, man. Well, guys, this has been so much fun. Chris Patterson, anybody you want to give a shout out to?
Man, I'd like to thank all my sponsors that helped me out. Don and April Morrison from F1 Diesel, always been on point with the fuel stuff. Gordon Lindemood for all the tuning. Guy's phenomenal. Y'all know that. Y'all can contest to his abilities. Being on the BD Diesel race team for 2019 and 2020 has been a great help. They having a family-oriented team that you can just basically call up and say, hey, this is what I broke. This is what's going on. It really makes or breaks how well a race team can be as who the people are around you. And then my whole crew here at the shop, it's hard to fathom how many hours it takes to do these things. We have it down where we can take a whole motor out in about 2 hours. We can take a whole tranny down to the bench in 22 minutes and fix a problem. So it takes a very dedicated team of guys, and I couldn't do it without all the people behind me.
Absolutely. And if our listeners want to go on and follow your page and follow Summit Diesel, where can they find you?
We do. We're on both Instagram and Facebook. Instagram, we are Summit Diesel TX. And my personal Instagram is Chris_Pat05. And then Facebook, Summit Diesel, Facebook, Chris Patterson. We're always posting up good and bad because I'm not afraid to show where I tear stuff up because I'm very good at that.
Well, guys, if you haven't voted, they're still doing the voting, correct?
Voting has not come out yet. We have not gotten a release of what trucks we can vote on yet. I think we all should be tagging Chris Patterson and Summit Diesel and DPC so that the guys over at Diesel Power Magazine know we want to vote on this truck.
Yeah, I feel like every year
Thank you. I
voting
greatly appreciate it.
is early or late or whatever, but yeah, nonetheless, guys, please vote for Chris Patterson going into 2020.
For today, this has been Paul Wilson
and Chris Emke.
Thanks for listening.
No lockdown. That's that. 808. Yeah, dude, that's like late 2010.